I'm Ethan, 32, male, and my family abandoned my 80-year-old grandmother home alone after she paid $20,000 for their luxury trip. That sentence is as monstrous to write as it is to comprehend, but it's the stark, unvarnished truth of what my family has become. It's the culmination of years of quiet manipulation and unchecked entitlement that finally boiled over into an act of cruelty, so profound it fundamentally altered the course of all our lives. My grandmother, Alina, is the heart of our family, or at least she was supposed to be. At 80, she is a woman built of soft smiles and hands that are rarely still, always knitting, gardening, or kneading dough. Her home, the one she's lived in for over 50 years, smells perpetually of cinnamon and clean laundry. It was always my sanctuary, a pocket of unconditional warmth in a family that often felt transactional. My mother, Brenda, is Alina's only daughter. At 55, she carries herself with an air of perpetual grievance, as if the world has consistently failed to live up to her expectations. She loves the idea of family, the perfect holiday photos, the reputation of being a devoted daughter, but struggles with the actual, unglamorous work of it. My father, Mark, is a quiet man who learned long ago that the path of least resistance was to agree with my mother. He's not a bad person in a vacuum, but his passivity has made him a willing accomplice to my mother's worst instincts. Then there's my younger brother, Ryan. At 28, he is my mother's masterpiece, a living monument to her belief that her children deserve the world without having to work for it. He's charming, handsome, and has the moral compass of a weather vane in a hurricane, always pointing in the direction of his own benefit. My relationship with my parents and brother has been strained for years. I moved to a different city for college and never moved back, a decision they interpreted as a personal slight. The distance, however, gave me perspective. I work as a social worker, a profession that exposes me to the sharp edges of human behavior daily. It fine-tuned my senses to the subtle, toxic dynamics that had been brewing in my own family for my entire life. Dynamics that always seemed to revolve around my grandmother's generosity. Looking back, the signs were always there, like faint cracks in a foundation that you ignore until the whole house starts to crumble. I can recall at least 3 specific instances that laid the groundwork for this final, devastating betrayal. The first was about 5 years ago when Ryan announced he was starting a digital marketing consulting business. He presented my parents and grandmother with a slick, hastily made slideshow about his vision. He needed, he claimed, $10,000 in seed money for equipment, software, and office space. I was skeptical. Ryan had never held a job for more than 6 months. When I questioned the specifics of his business plan, my mother shot me a look of pure venom. "Ethan, why can't you just be supportive of your brother?" she'd said, her voice laced with disappointment. "He's trying to build something for himself." Of course, my grandmother Alina, ever the believer in her grandchildren's potential, offered up the money without a second thought. "Every young man needs a start," she'd said, patting Ryan's hand. The business consisted of a new top-of-the-line gaming computer, a designer wardrobe, and a new car. The consulting firm never landed a single client and was forgotten within a year, as was the loan. When I brought it up to my father once, he just shrugged. "Your mother felt it was important to support him, and it was your grandmother's money to give." The second incident was a family vacation to a beach house a few years later. It was billed as a special trip for just the core family. I was told explicitly not to bring my long-term girlfriend. "It's just for us, honey," my mother had cooed over the phone. A real old-fashioned family getaway. I was annoyed, but I complied, wanting to keep the peace. We arrived at the rental, and a few hours later, Ryan pulled up with 2 of his buddies in tow. My mother didn't bat an eye. "Oh, the poor things needed a break," she'd said, fluffing a pillow for one of his friends. "Let the boys have their fun." The entire week, I was relegated to the role of family chauffeur and errand boy while my brother and his friends were treated as honored guests. My grandmother's money, of course, had paid for the rental. The third and most telling pattern was the constant low-level financial drain. My mother, Brenda, was the primary architect of this. She had a habit of calling Alina with a manufactured crisis. It was always something: a sudden car repair, a dental bill, a miscalculated utility payment. "Oh, Mom, I'm in such a bind," she would sigh dramatically. "I'm just a couple hundred short for the mortgage this month." Alina, whose greatest fear was seeing her children struggle, would wise transfer the money immediately. Yet my father had a stable, well-paying job. The math never added up. My mother always seemed to have a fresh manicure, new shoes, or was planning a weekend spa trip with her friends. It was a slow, steady siphoning of my grandmother's resources, disguised as a series of unfortunate events. I was the only one who saw it, the only one who lived outside their bubble of mutual justification. For them, Alina's money wasn't hers. It was a communal family resource, an advance on an inheritance they already felt entitled to. And my grandmother, bless her heart, was so terrified of being seen as a burden, so desperate for their time and affection that she paid for it in any way she could. She thought she was buying their love. In reality, she was only funding their greed, paving the road to the very moment they would take everything she had to offer and leave her utterly alone. The phone call that shattered my world came on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk, sipping coffee and trying to work through a particularly tough case file. My phone buzzed, displaying Grandma Alina. I smiled, assuming it was her weekly check-in call. She was supposed to be leaving with my parents and brother for their big Italy trip the next day. I expected to hear her voice, bubbling with the nervous excitement she always got before traveling. "Hey, Grams," I answered cheerfully. "Getting your passport ready, you must be so excited." Silence. All I could hear on the other end was a shaky, muffled breath, followed by a sound that knotted my stomach. A soft, heartbroken sob. "Grams," I said, my voice sharp with sudden concern. I sat bolt upright in my chair. "Grams, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "Oh, Ethan," she finally whispered, her voice thick with tears. "They're gone." I was confused. Gone where? To the airport? Isn't the flight tomorrow? My mind raced through possibilities. Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? "No, honey," she wept. "They left this morning. They're gone to Italy." The words didn't compute. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine, a feeling so primal and immediate it left me breathless. "What are you talking about? Without you, that's impossible. This was your trip." They said it would be too much for me," she explained, her voice breaking with each word. "Brenda came into my room yesterday evening. She said they had all been talking and they were worried the long flight and all the walking would be too strenuous for my heart. She said they were doing it to protect me." I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother, her face a mask of false concern, delivering the news with a gentle, patronizing tone. My father standing silently in the doorway, avoiding eye contact. My brother probably waiting in the car, impatient to get going. "Protect you," I repeated, my voice dangerously low. "Grams, what did you say?" "What could I say?" she asked, her voice turning frail. She said the decision was final, that the tickets were non-refundable and it was too late to change anything. She said they would bring me back a nice souvenir. She hugged me and then they left before I woke up this morning. A volcanic rage, hotter and more intense than anything I had ever felt, erupted in my chest. They hadn't just changed their minds. This was a calculated, premeditated act of cruelty. They had let her believe for months that she was going on the trip of a lifetime. They let her pack her bags, make her plans, and feel the joy of anticipation. They let her give them the $20,000 for the trip. And then at the 11th hour, they had cut her out with a flimsy, insulting excuse. They had stolen her money and her dream in one fell swoop. "Where are they staying, Grams? Do you have a hotel number?" I asked, my mind already shifting into crisis mode. I don't know," she admitted. "Brenda kept all the paperwork. She said she'd call when they landed in Rome." Of course she did. No paper trail, no way for us to reach them. They had complete control. They had thought of everything. "I'm coming, Grams," I said, my decision made in an instant. "I'm leaving right now. I'll be there in about 4 hours. Just sit tight. Don't answer the door for anyone. I'm on my way." "Oh, Ethan, you don't have to," she started, her ingrained habit of not wanting to be a bother kicking in even now. "Yes, I do," I said firmly, but with as much warmth as I could muster. "I want to. I'll see you this afternoon. I love you." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, my heart pounding in my ears. The case file on my desk seemed absurdly trivial. My world had narrowed to a single burning point of focus. My grandmother, alone in that big house, her heart broken by the very people who should have protected it most fiercely. I stood up and walked into my supervisor's office. "I have a family emergency," I said, my voice tight. "A serious one. I need to take leave effective immediately. I don't know when I'll be back." My supervisor, a kind woman who had seen me through many a professional crisis, took one look at my face and simply nodded. "Go, just keep us updated when you can." I didn't bother going home to pack. I grabbed my wallet and keys, walked out of my office and got into my car. As I pulled onto the highway, the 4-hour drive ahead of me felt both impossibly long and absolutely necessary. With every mile that passed, my rage solidified into a cold, hard resolve. My family had crossed a line from which there was no return. They had abandoned their mother and my grandmother, and I was going to make sure they understood the true cost of what they had done. The drive was a blur of highway hypnosis and simmering fury. I replayed the conversation with my grandmother over and over in my head, each recollection stoking the fire of my anger. I tried calling my mother, my father, and my brother. Each call went straight to voicemail. Their phones were either off for the flight or they were intentionally ignoring me. I knew it was the latter. I pulled onto my grandmother's quiet suburban street in the late afternoon. The familiar sight of her house, with its neatly tended rose bushes and welcoming front porch, was jarringly at odds with the ugliness I knew was waiting inside. The house looked silent, unnervingly still. I let myself in with my old key and called out, "Grams, it's me, Ethan." She emerged from the living room and the sight of her broke my heart. She was still in her dressing gown, her silver hair uncombed. Her eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were red-rimmed and swollen. She looked smaller, frailer than I had ever seen her. She threw her arms around me and began to cry again, deep, shuddering sobs that shook her entire body. I just held her, my own anger momentarily replaced by an overwhelming wave of sorrow for her pain. "I'm so glad you're here," she mumbled into my shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised her. After she calmed down, I took a proper look around. The house was in a state of quiet disarray. A half-packed suitcase sat open on the floor in the hallway, a cardigan and a pair of comfortable-looking shoes spilling out of it, her Italy suitcase. On the coffee table, a stack of mail lay unopened. In the kitchen, the breakfast dishes from the day before were still in the sink. My family hadn't even bothered to ensure the house was in order before they left. They had just vanished. "Did they make any arrangements for you, Grams?" I asked gently, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Did they set up grocery delivery, anyone to check in on you?" She shook her head, looking down at her hands. "Brenda said she'd sorted everything out. She said a neighbor would pop in every few days, but Mrs. Gable from next door is on vacation and Mr. Henderson across the street is unwell. I don't think she spoke to anyone, she just said she did." Of course, it was a lie to placate her, to make the abandonment feel less absolute. They had left an 80-year-old woman completely alone for a 3-week period with nothing more than a hollow promise. I spent the next hour making her a hot meal, tidying the kitchen, and just sitting with her, letting her talk. And as she talked, the full, devastating scope of their manipulation came into focus. She led me over to the dining room table, which was covered in glossy travel brochures. "Look," she said, her finger tracing a picture of the Colosseum in Rome. "Brenda brought these over 2 months ago. She was so excited." She told me how my mother had painted a beautiful picture for her. It wasn't just a trip, it was the last great family adventure. They would see the Vatican, toss coins in the Trevi Fountain, take a gondola ride in Venice. My mother had specifically talked about all the things Alina would get to see and do. She'd even bought her a new digital camera. "Ryan helped me look up videos of Italy on the computer," Alina said, a faint, wistful smile on her face. "He told me which gelato flavor I had to try first. He said he couldn't wait to take a picture with me in St. Mark's Square." It was psychological warfare disguised as family bonding. They had made her an integral part of the planning, weaving her into the very fabric of the trip's narrative. They made her feel wanted, cherished, and central to the experience. And then came the financial parts. Brenda said they'd been saving, but with the cost of everything they were still short, Alina explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper as if ashamed. She said this was their one dream and it was just out of reach. She cried, Ethan. She sat right here at this table and cried, saying she was so afraid they'd never get to have a memory like this together. The price tag was $20,000. It was a huge sum, a significant chunk of her retirement savings. She had hesitated, but my mother had been relentless. She'd framed it as an investment in family memories, a legacy. "Think of the stories we'll have, Mom," she had said. "This is more valuable than any money in the bank." Alina, whose deepest desire was to have her family happy and close, had relented. She had gone to the bank and withdrawn the money, handing it over to my mother in a crisp white envelope. She didn't see it as paying for their trip. She saw it as buying a piece of shared joy. As I listened, I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made out of misguided concern. This was a long con, a meticulously planned operation to fleece their own mother and grandmother. They had dangled her dream in front of her, let her pay for it, and then snatched it away at the last possible moment when the money was spent and it was too late to do anything about it. "Grams," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This isn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. You were loving and generous. They took advantage of that." She looked at me, her eyes swimming with a mixture of shame and sorrow. "I feel so foolish." "You are not foolish," I insisted, taking her hand. "You are kind. They are the fools. They traded you for a vacation, and I promise you it's the worst deal they will ever make." That evening, as my grandmother slept, exhausted from the emotional turmoil, I sat in the silent living room, the travel brochures spread out before me. I looked at the pictures of happy, smiling families posing in front of ancient ruins and picturesque canals. My family was going to be one of them, living a fantasy funded by a lie, while the woman who gave them everything was left behind in the quiet, heartbreaking reality they had created for her. The first few days were about establishing a new routine. I worked remotely from my grandmother's dining room table, taking frequent breaks to cook for her, watch old movies, or just sit with her in the garden. Slowly, painstakingly, I saw a flicker of her old self return. The dazed, heartbroken look in her eyes began to recede, replaced by a quiet resignation. But the silence in the house was heavy, punctuated only by my typing and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The elephant in the room was 4,000 miles away, basking in the Italian sun. My family, as predicted, did not call. There were no check-ins, no "we've landed safely" messages. The silence from their end was absolute, a confirmation that their departure was not just a trip but an excommunication. They had cut the cord. Curiosity, that morbid, painful impulse, got the better of me on the third day. I opened my laptop and navigated to my brother Ryan's social media page. His profile was public, a stage for his carefully curated life. And there it was. The first photo was a selfie of him, my mother, and my father, all grinning from ear to ear. They were seated in what looked like business-class airline seats, glasses of champagne raised in a toast. The caption read, "And we're off, Rome, here we come, time to make some memories of a lifetime. Airplane # family travel blessed." My blood ran cold. Blessed. The audacity of that word was like a physical blow. They were blessed while my grandmother sat alone, her heart in pieces. I scrolled down, my stomach twisting with each new post. There was a photo of their five-star hotel near the Spanish Steps, with a balcony overlooking the city. My mother had posted that one, captioned, "Our view for the next few days, I could get used to this," winking face. There was Ryan posing dramatically in front of the Colosseum, sunglasses on, a smug grin plastered on his face. Gladiator vibes today, what an incredible place. There was a picture of a table laden with food, pasta, wine, artisan cheeses, desserts. My father, a man I rarely saw truly smile, looked giddy. "The food here is unreal," Ryan had written. "Sorry for what this is going to do to my diet, worth it." Each photo was a dagger, each cheerful caption a twist of the knife. They weren't just on vacation, they were performing. They were flaunting their happiness, a garish, tone-deaf spectacle built on the foundation of their cruelty. They had created this perfect, sun-drenched narrative of a happy family, and the price of admission was my grandmother's heart and her bank account. The worst one came a day later. It was a photo my mother posted. It was a candid shot of her and my father walking hand in hand down a charming cobblestone street. They looked happy, relaxed, and carefree. The caption was what sent me over the edge. "It's so important to get away and recharge. We give so much of ourselves to others, sometimes you have to remember to take care of yourselves too," read. I felt a guttural rage build in my throat. We give so much of ourselves to others. The hypocrisy was so staggering, so utterly shameless that I had to close the laptop. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter to steady M. A self, they had reframed their selfish, monstrous act as one of self-care. They weren't villains in their story. They were martyrs, finally taking a well-deserved break from the burden of caring for the very woman they had just robbed. I showed none of this to my grandmother. She didn't need to see it. She was living the consequences. She didn't need to be tortured by the photographic evidence of their glee. But seeing those posts changed something in me. My initial mission had been one of support, to be there for my grandmother, to comfort her. Now a new mission was taking shape. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This wasn't just a matter of hurt feelings. This was a profound injustice. They had committed a calculated act of financial and emotional abuse against a vulnerable, elderly person. My job as a social worker had trained me to recognize the signs, to understand the patterns. I had sat with countless clients who had been exploited by those they trusted most. I had fought for them, advocated for them, and helped them navigate the system to find justice. Now the case wasn't in a file on my desk, it was in my own family, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing. The idea that they would return from this trip tanned and happy, laden with souvenirs bought with her money, and simply walk back into her life as if nothing had happened, was unacceptable. The idea that they would face no consequences for their actions was unconscionable. That evening I sat with my grandmother in the living room. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. "Grams," I began, choosing my words carefully. "What they did to you wasn't just mean or thoughtless. It was wrong, seriously wrong. There are names for what they did." She looked at me, her expression wary. "What are you saying, Ethan?" "I'm saying they abused your trust. They took your money under false pretenses and abandoned you. That's called elder financial abuse. It's a real thing and it's serious. She flinched at the words as if they were too harsh, too clinical for a family matter. They're still my family, Ethan. I know, I said softly, but family shouldn't get a free pass to hurt you. Family should be the last people on earth to do something like this. I took a deep breath. I think we need to talk to someone, a professional, a lawyer. The color drained from her face. A lawyer? Oh no, honey, I could never sue my own daughter. This isn't about suing anyone, not yet, I clarified, trying to calm her. It's about understanding our options. It's about protecting you, Grams, protecting your home, your savings, your future. We need to make sure this can never, ever happen again. Can we at least just talk to someone? No commitments, just a conversation for me. She looked at me, her grandson, the one who had dropped everything to be by her side. She looked around her quiet, empty house. She thought of the lies, the broken promises, and the deafening silence from her daughter, son-in-law, and other grandson. I saw a flicker of something new in her eyes, not just hurt, but a spark of anger, a spark of defiance. She nodded slowly. Okay, Ethan, she said, her voice quiet but firm, for you, we'll make a call. Finding the right lawyer felt like a monumental task. I didn't want a bulldog litigator who would only escalate the conflict. I needed someone who specialized in elder law and family mediation, someone with a nuanced understanding of the delicate emotions involved. I spent an entire day researching, making quiet phone calls from the back porch while my grandmother rested. I finally found a firm that was highly recommended. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer named Sarah Jenkins, who had a reputation for being both compassionate and incredibly sharp. Telling my grandmother about the appointment was one thing, getting her to go was another. The morning of the consultation, she was full of apprehension. I don't know about this, Ethan, she said, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. This feels wrong. We shouldn't be airing our family's dirty laundry with a stranger. Grams, our laundry is already out there, I said gently but firmly. They aired it when they took your money and left you here. This isn't about shaming them, it's about protecting you. Sarah Jenkins just wants to listen, that's all. If you're uncomfortable at any point, we can leave, I promise. My reassurance seemed to work. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and nodded. All right, let's go. Sarah Jenkins' office was nothing like the intimidating legal dens you see in movies. It was a calm, welcoming space with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Sarah herself was a woman in her late 40s with a kind face and a no-nonsense demeanor. She greeted us warmly and listened patiently, without interruption, as I laid out the whole story from the history of financial gifts to the final, cruel act of the Italy trip. My grandmother sat silently beside me for most of it, but Sarah was skilled at drawing her out. She turned to Alina and asked simple, direct questions. Alina, she began, her tone respectful. When your daughter asked for the money, did she specifically say it was so that you could go with them? Oh yes, my grandmother replied, finding her voice. She said, we'll have such a wonderful time together, Mom. She had me pick out which tour I wanted to take. And did you sign any kind of document, a gift letter or a loan agreement? Alina shook her head. No, it was just family. I gave her the money in an envelope. Sarah made a few notes. And since they've been gone, have they contacted you at all? No, Alina whispered, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. I reached over and squeezed her hand. After gathering all the facts, Sarah leaned back in her chair. Ethan, your assessment is correct, she said. This isn't just a moral issue, it's a legal one. What you have here is a textbook case of elder financial exploitation with a strong element of promissory fraud. They made a specific promise to induce her to part with her money, and then they willfully broke that promise. Hearing it laid out in such stark, legal terms seemed to solidify the situation for both of us. This wasn't just a story of a family that had behaved badly. A crime had been committed. So what can we do? I asked. You have several options, Sarah explained. The most aggressive route would be to file a lawsuit and take them to court. Given the evidence, the bank withdrawal, the lack of contact, your testimony, we would have a very strong case. However, that's a long, expensive, and emotionally draining process, especially for your grandmother. Alina visibly tensed at the mention of a lawsuit. A second and perhaps more appropriate option, Sarah continued, looking directly at my grandmother, is a more structured, private approach. We can draft a formal legal demand. It would outline the facts of what occurred and demand the full repayment of the $20,000 within a specified time frame. It would also include a stipulation for any future contact to be managed carefully, perhaps through a mediator, to prevent further manipulation. She paused, letting the information sink in. Basically, we confront them with the legal reality of their actions. We show them that we are serious and that we have the power to take this public if they refuse to cooperate. Often, the threat of legal action and public exposure is enough to bring people to the table. This felt right. It was strong without being needlessly destructive. It offered a path to restitution without immediately resorting to all-out war. "And what if they refuse?" I asked. "Then we cross that bridge when we come to it," Sarah said calmly. "But let's be clear. If they refuse, they are risking a court case that they would very likely lose, one that would create a public record of their actions. For people concerned with their image, like your mother sounds to be, that's a powerful deterrent." We spent another hour discussing the details. By the end of the meeting, a remarkable transformation had occurred in my grandmother. The fear and hesitation had been replaced by a quiet resolve. The law, which had seemed so alien and frightening to her, now felt like a shield. Sarah had given her a sense of agency she hadn't felt in decades. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was someone with rights. "I'll do it," Eleanor said as we stood to leave. Her voice didn't waver. "I want the money back, and I don't want them to think they can ever do this again." Sarah smiled warmly. "Good, I'll get the paperwork drafted immediately. We'll be ready for them when they get home." The drive back to the house was different. The heavy silence was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose. We had a plan, we had an advocate, we had taken the first crucial step from being passive victims to active participants in our own story. The dread of my family's return was still there, but now it was mixed with a new feeling, anticipation. The confrontation was coming, but this time we would be the ones in control. The 3 weeks crawled by. My grandmother and I settled into a peaceful rhythm, but beneath the surface the tension was building. We knew the day of reckoning was approaching. Sarah, our lawyer, had been true to her word. A thick, intimidating packet of legal documents sat on the mantelpiece, a silent testament to the storm that was about to break. The call came on a Sunday evening. It was my mother, her voice sickeningly cheerful. "We're back," she chirped, as if calling after a weekend away. "We just landed. Oh, Ethan, you won't believe the trip we had. I'm exhausted, but it was worth every penny. We'll be at Mom's in about an hour to drop off our bags and tell her all about it." She didn't ask why I was the one answering my grandmother's phone. She didn't ask if her mother was okay. The self-absorption was breathtaking. "We'll be here," I said, my voice flat and cold. I hung up before she could say another word. I turned to my grandmother. "They're on their ways." She took a deep breath and nodded, clutching the arm of her favorite chair. "I'm ready." I called Sarah, who had agreed to be present for the confrontation. She arrived 20 minutes later, calm and professional, her presence a steadying force in the room. We sat in the living room, the three of us waiting. The sound of their car pulling into the driveway sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The front door opened, and they burst in, a whirlwind of luggage, shopping bags, and loud chatter. "Moms, you will not believe the leather market in Florence," my brother Ryan boomed, dropping a massive suitcase in the hall. "And the food, my goodness," my mother gushed, pulling off a silk scarf. "We brought you back some limoncello." They froze when they saw us. Their smiles faltered as they took in the scene, me sitting stony-faced on the sofa, my grandmother looking resolute in her armchair, and a sharply dressed stranger holding a briefcase sitting opposite them. My mother recovered first, her face hardening. "Ethan, what a surprise, and who is this?" she asked, gesturing vaguely at Sarah. "Mom, Dad, Ryan," I said, standing up. "This is Sarah Jenkins, she's my grandmother's lawyer." The word lawyer hung in the air like a toxin. My father, Mark, went pale. Ryan's smug expression dissolved into confusion. My mother's eyes narrowed into slits. "A lawyer," she scoffed, forcing a laugh. "What on earth for, Mom, what is this?" She directed the question at Eleanor, her tone a mixture of accusation and feigned concern. But before my grandmother could speak, Sarah stood up. "Mrs. Miller," she said to my mother, her voice calm and authoritative. "We're here today to discuss the $20,000 your mother provided for a trip to Italy under the promise that she would be accompanying you." My mother's face flushed a deep, angry red. "That was a gift. She gave us that money as a gift. She wanted to help us have a nice vacation." "It was a gift for the family to go on vacation together," I cut in, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "A trip you explicitly told her she was a part of. A trip you planned with her, got her excited for, and then cut her out of at the last minute." "We did it for her own good," my mother shrieked, her voice rising. "The travel would have been too much for her. We were protecting her health. How dare you turn this into something ugly?" This was the moment of peak gaslighting. The lie they had told themselves so many times they almost believed it. Protecting her, I shot back, taking a step forward. You left her alone for 3 weeks with no one to check on her. You didn't arrange for care. You didn't even clean the dishes before you left. You posted photos of your five-star hotels and champagne toasts all over the internet while she sat here heartbroken. That isn't protection, Mom. That's abandonment. You have no idea what you're talking about, Ryan sneered, finding his voice. Grams was happy to help us out. Tell him, Grams. He turned to her, his expression confident that she would fold, that she would smooth things over as she always did. All eyes went to Alina. The room was silent except for the frantic ticking of the clock. My grandmother looked at her daughter, her son-in-law, and her younger grandson. She saw their tanned faces, their designer shopping bags, their expressions of outrage and indignation. They weren't sorry, they felt wronged. She took a slow, steadying breath. You promised me, Brenda, she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of her pain. You promised we would see the Trevi fountain together. You said we would toss a coin in, all of us. You told me to practice using my new camera for the pictures we would take. She looked at Ryan. You said you couldn't wait to take a picture with me in Venice. You helped me pick out a scarf to wear for it. Her words, so simple and true, were more powerful than any legal argument. They cut through all their blustering and excuses, laying the raw, emotional truth of their betrayal bare. My mother looked stunned, as if she couldn't believe her own mother would dare to contradict her. Sarah Jenkins seized the moment. She stepped forward and placed the thick envelope on the coffee table. This is a formal demand for the repayment of the $20,000 your mother gave you under false pretenses, she stated clearly. It also includes a legal notice of intent. If the sum is not repaid according to the schedule within, we will proceed with a civil lawsuit. All the documentation is here. I suggest you have your own lawyer review it. My father finally spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. This is insane. We don't have $20,000. You had it a week ago, I said coldly. You spent it on hotels, fancy meals, and whatever is in those shopping bags. Perhaps you can start by returning some of it. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on them. This wasn't a family squabble they could charm or bully their way out of. This was real. There were legal documents, lawyers, and consequences. Their perfect self-serving narrative had been shattered. They stood there in the living room they had so eagerly fled, finally cornered by the truth. They weren't the gracious adventurers or the caring children. They were just thieves who had been caught. The confrontation left a crater in the middle of our family. My mother, father, and brother stood in shocked silence for a long moment before my mother finally snatched the envelope from the table. You will regret this, Ethan, she spat, her eyes burning with a hateful fire. You have destroyed this family. No, I replied calmly, my voice steady for the first time that night. You destroyed it. I'm just holding you accountable for the damage. They left without another word, not even a glance at my grandmother. They slammed the door behind them, and the silence that filled the house was different this time. It wasn't the heavy, mournful silence of abandonment. It was the clean, quiet emptiness that comes after a storm has passed, washing everything away. My grandmother was shaking, but she was smiling through her tears. I did it, she whispered, looking at me. I really did it. You were amazing, Grams, I said, hugging her tightly. In the weeks that followed, my family, through their own lawyer, fought back. They tried to claim it was a legitimate gift, that I had unduly influenced my grandmother. But Sarah was prepared. The evidence was overwhelming and their case was flimsy. Faced with the certainty of a public, humiliating court battle, they finally capitulated. They agreed to a strict, legally binding repayment plan, a monthly transfer from their account to my grandmother's that would serve as a constant reminder of their disgrace. Our relationship, as expected, was severed. They sent me a single, venomous text message telling me I was no longer their son or brother. It hurt, but it felt more like the amputation of a diseased limb than a true loss. The family I had grown up with had been an illusion, and I was finally free of it. The most important work began after the legal battle was won. With Sarah's help, we completely restructured my grandmother's finances. We set up a trust and put safeguards in place to ensure no one could ever exploit her again. But the real change wasn't on paper. It was in my grandmother herself. Freed from the constant, draining weight of my mother's emotional and financial demands, Alina began to blossom. It was like watching a flower that had been deprived of sun finally turn towards the light. The first thing we did was get her out of the house. I found a local senior center that offered a wide range of activities, art classes, book clubs, gardening groups, and gentle exercise programs. At first, she was hesitant, clinging to the familiar quiet of her home. But I gently pushed her, driving her to her first pottery class. I waited in the car like a nervous parent on the first day of school. An hour later, she came out with a smudge of clay on her cheek and a genuine, unforced smile on her face. I made a very lopsided bowl, she announced, and I made a new friend. Her name is Marge. It was the beginning of a whole new life for her. Marge introduced her to the book club. The book club members invited her to their weekly walking group. Soon her calendar was filled not with anxious waiting for a phone call from my mother, but with coffee dates, museum trips, and potluck dinners. She was building a community, a real one, based on shared interests and mutual respect, not on obligation and guilt. Her house, once so silent, was now filled with the sounds of her new life. The phone would ring, and it would be one of her friends calling to chat. There were new photos on the mantelpiece, not of a fake smiling family in Italy, but of her and a group of laughing ladies, all proudly holding up their lopsided pottery. I ended up extending my leave and staying with her for 3 months, helping her navigate this new chapter. We spent our evenings cooking together, trying new recipes she'd gotten from her friends. We spent weekends in the garden, not just tidying, but redesigning it completely, planting new flowers she'd never had before. One sunny afternoon, we were on our knees in the soil, planting rose bushes. My grandmother paused, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of a dirt-covered glove. She looked at the vibrant garden, at the clear blue sky, at me. "You know, Ethan," she said, her voice full of a peaceful clarity I hadn't heard in years. "For the longest time, I thought my greatest fear was being alone, but I was never truly alone, I was just lonely. I was lonely in a house full of people who were supposed to love me." She patted the soil around a new rose bush. "I lost a daughter and a grandson," she said, her voice steady, "but I think I found myself again. You gave me that." I looked at my grandmother, her face illuminated by the afternoon sun, her eyes clear and bright, and I knew she was right. I had lost the family I grew up with, the one I had always tried so desperately to please, but in doing so I had saved the most important person in it, and in saving her I had found a deeper, more honest definition of what family truly means. It's not about blood or obligation, it's about showing up. It's about protecting each other. It's about planting gardens together and watching new things grow. So I have to ask, was I wrong to bring in a lawyer and in doing so blow up my entire family? Some people might say I should have handled it privately, that family is family no matter what. But when you see someone you love being systematically broken down, do you have any other choice but to fight for them, even if it means destroying the illusion you once called home? What would you have done? After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human, navigating complex relationships and difficult choices. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.